I teach honors classes, I teach special ed classes as well, and usually the problems we get into are vocabulary problems, because if a student can't get past the vocabulary, they're just going to stop and they're going to turn off. And so I'm very willing to help them if they're having some problems with vocabulary. I ask them to try to figure out from the context of the language of the document what is going on, what the author is trying to get across, and not worry too much about a particular word. The textbook that we use in conjunction with the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence is excellent when it comes to vocabulary, which is laid out alongside of the wording of the document. And it varies from class to class. The honors classes tend to do that more than the lower level classes, but even those classes, if they're having problems with vocabulary, they're willing to look at the vocabulary, especially if they're interested in the document. I mean, if they're not interested in the document, you're never going to get that far. So you have to give them a hook to begin with to sort of get them into the whole discussion. I think if I was doing it with a higher level honors class, I would have added a section giving them copies of preliminary drafts of the Declaration of Independence and asking them to compare and contrast and see how the document changed over a fairly short period of time, and what they hypothesized the reasons were for the changes, you know, who were the authors trying to satisfy or placate, and, you know, did they think that the document that turned out to be the final version, was that a better version, or were perhaps one of the earlier drafts better versions? I did use the parchment for the first time, and frankly I was a little skeptical at first. I wasn't exactly sure how much the students were going to get out of touching a piece of parchment, but students love touching things, and they understand that this was a little bit different from dealing with a document that's on a piece of paper, and the spelling and the lettering and the fact that they knew that this had to be written with a quill pen. When I first started using primary sources, I would typically use them for honors classes. Over the past few years, ever since I've been involved with the Teaching American History program, it's very, very clear that no matter what level of class you're dealing with, they always get something out of the primary source. They always come up with things that surprise me. And so I think if I was trying to describe how my use of primary sources has changed over the past few years, I use a lot more primary sources. Basically, we don't even hand out the textbook anymore. The only time I use the textbook is the appendix where we have the copies of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. It does take preparation, and it may take a lot of contextual knowledge that they don't have, that you have to give them beforehand, and then you have to work on the vocabulary. But there's no question that the students get a lot more out of the primary sources than just standing up there and describing a document. There are several documents that lead up to the writing of the Constitution, and when I first started teaching civics, I would talk about Jefferson's Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, and I'd say this served as a model for the First Amendment religion clauses. And they'd go, okay, that's fine. And what I do now is I actually pull out excerpts from the Statute for Religious Freedom. I have them read it, and I say, what does this sound like? Or where else have you heard this language? And I mean, isn't this sort of like what shows up in the First Amendment? And then we sit down and we take a look at the First Amendment and we compare it to the Statute for Religious Freedom. Or I'll take the Bill of Rights. We'll sit down and compare it to the Virginia Declaration of Rights. And I said, anyone see anything similar here? And they go, wait a minute, these are identical. And that's always an aha moment for them. And they always say, well, did George Mason get mad that James Madison, you know, sort of took his stuff? And so having them take a look at the documents and compare them is usually a very eye-opening situation for them. And I think they get a lot out of that.